117, and this is the news section. It's being broadcast to you on the 7th. Well, it's been recorded on the 7th, Tuesday. Stormy day outside. Gazebo was down already, and other damage.
Not a day for swimming.
No, not a day for really being outdoors. Not a day for the bins to be collected either. So there's rubbish all over the place, and seagulls battering their heads off each other for the scraps. So we're kind of a week on from Omicron, and Andrew's here with me to tell me what exactly we're doing, which is kind of like not really nothing to be alarmed at. Let's just keep going till Christmas. Is that the plan?
Right, well, let me see. So the context in Ireland is cases are slowly increasing week on week.
Yeah.
So like last night, although we had a bizarrely low case count last night, and I'll mention this now because I'm annoyed with it. Bizarrely low case count last night of 2,950, but there were actually 4,959 positive swabs. So obviously that's just, the lab workers getting overworked and not being able to process everything in time or whatever.
Sorry, what were the positive swabs? How many was there?
4,959, I think.
4,959. And does that 2,950 include the 4,959?
It's a little complicated. The two reporting windows don't overlap. However, there were also 4,507 on the Sunday, so there should have been a report of about 4,500 or more cases, and instead it was 2,950.
Okay, so it's just a total anomaly, but it doesn't mean that we actually had a dip.
No, but here's the thing. So this morning there's some gobshite Fianna Fáil senator who, when I looked him up, he's the hospitality spokesperson or something.
Of course.
Saying, it's the lowest cases in a month.
It's going down. It's going down.
It says two things. One, it's the lowest cases in a month, which obviously is bullshit because that's purely an artifact of testing being strange. And then he goes on, and this is the thing that's annoyed me as well, to say that there were no hospitality outbreaks in the last outbreak report, which is true. And the reason for that is because there were no resources to trace hospitality. The cases are so high. It's all nursing homes.
Okay.
But I've seen a few people now claim that zero represents none. And in fact, did I cover this on Sunday? I think I did. I mentioned this. I went back and I worked out how many hospitality outbreaks had been traced from cases back in August when it was a lot quieter and they were able to do more. And from that, I worked out that if you assume the same ratio, i.e. one outbreak for about every 2,000 cases, we'd have had about 14 recorded last week. So we definitely wouldn't have had zero. So two things about statistics early on and people being dishonest with statistics, and I might go on a mad rant later on the show. I went on one last night on Twitter, but let's skip over that for the moment. But anyway, so the reality of a situation.
Yeah, let's deal with what we know for sure.
The brief reality is that cases are increasing every week and have been for a while. I think there was 1 week where maybe they stayed about even. It's not a huge rate of increase. And because of the booster program, probably, and also because more vulnerable people are now isolating again, we haven't seen that come through into hospital cases, which is really interesting. So basically, the proportion of cases going to hospital is around 1.4% at the moment, and that's basically, is it half? Yeah, it's about half what it has been for most of the time, and about a third of what it was back in mid-October. So that has basically insulated us from the sort of really scary hospital numbers we saw projected last month. Like if we were doing that at the kind of 2.6, 2.8% level, then instead of seeing 500 going into hospital every week, we'd see about 1,000, right? And we'd have about 1,100 in hospital now. So that's okay. What's protecting us.
So, but why is that happening? Like, that's what I don't understand. Is it because we're going through the numbers of unvaccinated are getting it, so that figure is getting smaller and smaller?
You see, there's multiple possible reasons, and it's hard to know which of them it is. So one thing we can say for sure, okay, it's boosters, right? Because boosters have been given to the older sections of the population. They're the ones with the highest risk of hospitalisation. It's stopping them. They're stopping them in the short term getting infected as well. So that basically means that kind of over 65 cohort is now getting infected a lot less than it used to be, right? So that's one end of it. Another end of it is actually, if you look at where the infection's happening and where they're increasing quickest at the moment, that's in primary school kids, right? With primary school kids, you need a huge amount of cases to get hospitalizations, right? Now, there are a huge amount of cases, so therefore there are primary school kids in hospital right now because of it. But you're talking about a rate of about one for every 300-400 cases, I think.
Right.
So that's 0.025% sort of thing, or lower. In fact, I think it's 0.015% at times. So that's a second reason. The third one is behavioural shifts, and that's basically if you're more at risk, you've reacted to this high level of cases, in many cases, not in all cases, by deciding to stay at home, not go out as much. So you're less likely to be infected. Probably the people in that age group that are getting infected are probably quite commonly people who need to go to hospital or the medical facilities, things like that. Sometimes it's friends and neighbours, but it's, so that's also cut down on that quite a bit. They're the three. Oh, and there's a fourth one which is kind of a little hard to explain. I mentioned it on, I think, about 2 or 3 shows back, which is as the younger, so your adult population that hasn't got boosted, right? Their immunity to infection at this stage is waning, right? So they're getting infected more often. However, we know that immunity to severe disease stands up longer. We don't know how long, or maybe quite a bit longer, right?
Yeah.
So actually, what happens is you're more likely to be infected, but you're less likely to go to hospital in comparison with the previous waves. So that would also pull that ratio down. So there's a mixture of things in that mix. So of those, though, what we can say is, so the disease being concentrated in primary kids, age school children, could happen for a while, but obviously would eventually come to an end, right? Likewise, if it's people isolating because of the risk, that's not something that's going to be maintained forever because it's hard to do, for long periods of time. So that could see it pop back up again, and if it pops up when we're still at really high cases, that's going to be a problem. However, if what's driving this is immunity to severe consequences in younger adults and booster shots in older adults, that may maintain itself, right? So actually, because the reason I started tracking this percentage ages ago was so that I could see when it fell and get some sort of idea of when the vaccines were working enough that more things could be open. So that's kind of my interest in that particular metric anyway. And maybe that's now happening. And a fifth thing we should mention is that, of course, you mentioned it at the start, unvaccinated people, a lot of them have now been infected. And that should leave them with the ones who survive it and the ones who don't get long-term health consequences as a result. They're both significant factors, but that should mean that on subsequent infections there's some protection against severe disease. We don't know exactly how much yet, but that again will pull it down a bit. So they're the factors we're looking at.
And if you're a Fianna Fáil backbencher, you don't have to worry about any of those things. You just say the numbers are going down. Yeah, brilliant. So we have they found? Let's move on to the supervillain known as Omicron. Have they found it here?
Omicron,
whatever.
Correcting you wrongly, but it's definitely not Omicron.
Omicron.
Right. We did one case which was travel related. We thought we might have 8 or 9, but in fact the others turned out to be this is the S gene dropout thing again, right? The S gene dropout can happen through random mutation of Delta, or because other strains are in the mix as well. So in other words, because it doesn't identify doesn't necessarily mean it's not Delta. If you've low prevalence of Omicron and you get S gene dropout, then it's probably in a lot of cases it's not it. It's just a random 1 in 10,000 mutation for the other things, and then as that prevalence raises, then the S gene dropout becomes a much more accurate measure. So in England at the moment, they're now getting a lot of cases every day from that. Looks like they've our value is about 3.64 or something over there. And I saw one calculation this morning that
this is just for generally in
for Omicron in England.
3.6 for Omicron.
Yeah, I saw a calculation this morning where the guy reckoned that there might well be 2,500 cases there already. Now that's not what they've measured. What they've measured is far under that, but it does seem to be spreading in the community over there quite a bit. The one case we had, I think, was travel related,
Right.
so there's a reasonable chance that maybe we got that before it transmitted onwards. Now, I mean, it's fairly obvious what will happen is it will be introduced from England in definitely in the Christmas period.
The Christmas
as people
period
come
we're
home.
going to
That's
have.
a very obvious thing
it's
to happen.
obvious thing.
But also in between now and then.
Kind of how Delta really took off.
Yeah,
isn't it?
people go back and forth for stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Weddings, whatever, funerals. I mean, there's going to be a fair bit of movement back and forth. And although the testing requirement coming in now will catch some proportion of those cases, it's very unlikely to catch more than half. And probably even a third would be lucky. So all we're really doing is slowing it down, which is significant because, of course, as we're slowing it, then more booster shots are getting to people. And I mean, Christmas is going to be messy if it's here and transmitting a lot. If it's slowed so that there's not that many cases introduced already here, then that would probably be helpful in not turning Christmas into another complete disaster. But to be honest, I don't think things look good at the moment in that respect.
Okay, so we don't know if it's here or not. What do we know about it? We think that your value, like, it always takes time to establish this kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of rumour to begin with.
Yeah, these are very early attempts at measuring
Very early
it.
attempts. So, like, is there anything definitive that we can go on in terms of what type of variant we're dealing with here?
No, there's still a lot of speculation around this. It's quite hard because for instance, if in South Africa and in England, we're seeing it transmit faster or reaching more people faster than is the case with Delta, and we don't know if that's because it is inherently fitter, whether it just does infect people faster and get them to infect other people faster, or whether it's evading existing immunities from vaccination or from infection.
Yeah.
There's no easy way of telling one of those from the other in the initial period.
Okay.
And it could well be a mixture of both. I mean, we do have a few kind of things that are a bit worrying in terms of it appearing to get around immunity. Thank you. So the one everybody's talking about at the moment is Christmas party in Oslo there last week. That I think it was an energy company. One of them had just returned from South Africa and was infected without knowing it. And so we're now looking. So this took place in a restaurant, and we're now looking at I think 120 cases coming out of it. About 2/3 of those from other people from the same company at the party, and another third for just other people who happen to be in the same restaurant bar at the same time. Now it's possible that the index case ate in the restaurant with the rest of his office party or her office party, and then went to the bar afterwards and was near some of these other people who get infected. But that's still an extraordinary attack rate.
How many people were at this restaurant?
I think what I've seen is that the company party itself had about 100 at it. I don't think there's a figure for how many were in the restaurant overall. Now, one of the factors people are saying is that there was a big storm in Oslo that night, and that may have meant that the ventilation for the restaurant just wasn't extracting air. There was positive pressure forcing it back in, basically.
Right.
In which case, if the person who was infected was at peak infection, and you're then talking about a space that there's no ventilation at all going into it, you can see why there'd be so many infections coming out. But I mean, that's obviously really worrying because that happens at maybe a gig or a pantomime or even a busy bar or a restaurant. Then you've got your one case is suddenly 50 or 60 cases, and by the time you even know that's happened, each of those cases has become more. And it's the difficult thing we're in at the moment is because we've kept most stuff open. It's not that hard to imagine a scenario where even at quite a small number of cases could rapidly turn into quite a big number if it happened to be the wrong person at the wrong place at the wrong time. So I'm nervous about that.
Okay, yeah. And so how are they testing for this now exactly? What happens when you come into the country? You have to get tested.
When you arrive, you have to have either a negative PCR test or a negative antigen test. If it's an antigen test, it has to be It can't be one you've self-administered. It has to be basically one that comes with a cert because the company have done it. So like Boots, for instance, do them as pre-flight thing. Yeah, right. I think most of the airports probably have them at those as well. But the problem with those is I think the PCR test can be 3 days beforehand and the antigen 2 days beforehand. So in other words, you could easily have got infected in the meantime. But
and
also,
then you're on a flight and you're probably got infected on the flight itself.
Yeah, also PCR is very unlikely to pick up as positive within 4 days of being infected. So in effect, 4 days plus 3 days, you've got 7 days that you could be infected in and it wouldn't be picked up before you get on that flight. Antigen is even a little bit longer, so again, maybe 7 or 8 days. And then, of course, your exposure in an airport is very high. There's probably some use, in fact, in that it'll probably catch people who are actually infectious in the airport. So maybe that's reducing the risk of you getting on that plane or queuing at security or whatever else.
Well, hold on a second. You said something that I didn't know before in all of this. Mm-hmm. So you could actually theoretically be positive. You could have COVID and go for a PCR test, and the PCR test wouldn't tell you that you had it.
Yeah, it's like a pregnancy test. You know, like if you've had sex the night before, you get a pregnancy test. You won't test positive. You know, you won't test positive on a pregnancy test for several days after you've actually been pregnant. And it's a similar thing with both antigen and PCR in that they need a minimum amount of virus in your system or viral proteins in the case of antigen tests for it to pick up and be registered as positive. And in the initial stages of the infection, that doesn't happen. I mean, a fairly easy way to imagine it is I'm queuing to get my PCR test. So somebody else is positive in the queue with me. They sneeze and I get some, half a dozen viruses up my nose or something. I get swabbed.
You're negative.
It's not going to pick that up, but
detected.
I've been infected. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure that actually happens that people get infected while getting tested. So
also,
so it basically means like the arrivals testing thing. It's some use in terms of if you can cut the number of cases coming in by a third or a half, that's an impact. It probably is almost as much use in that it probably puts some people off travelling at all.
It's probably a total discouragement.
Yeah,
I mean, people going anywhere for a weekend, you're just not going to...
it all starts to become a bit too much hassle, but it's not going to keep it out. And once there are a substantial amount of cases in England, then there will be a substantial amount here. And in fact, even if we kept it out on that level, once there's a substantial amount of cases in Northern Ireland, there'll be a substantial case. So if you remember Delta coming in, that's basically what happened. It slowed it down, but it still came in and then it suddenly took off. And we're liable to see a more extreme version of that with Omicron.
Okay, so we're simmering along nicely, 4,900 cases. What is it, 4,000? Yeah, 4,900, say...
Yeah, we kind of like over the last couple of weeks we've gone from being close to 4,000 to close to 4,500. This week I think we're going to come out as being close to 5,000 today, basically. And
ICU numbers surprisingly are going down because you outlined the 5 kind of reasons for that.
Yeah, they're not. I mean, the ICU is it's stable to a slight decrease, but that's basically because people are dying there. So otherwise it would be going up. And I'm wary of using ICU as a stat for how we're actually doing, because actual capacity, the very near capacity basically all the time. There was a day where Dublin had no beds at all available overnight. So you don't know if the number of people with COVID in ICU is the number of people who need to go into ICU with COVID, or just that's all the available space has been filled and there's other people being treated with high flow oxygen systems instead.
Okay.
In fact, we know there's other people being treated with high flow oxygen systems. Like probably if there's 120 in ICU, there's 200 to 250. Yeah.
Okay, so then the whole thing about like information in relation to this, I want to talk about that because are we still at like one HSE press conference a week and one NEFID press conference a week?
No, there hasn't been an NEFID one in a month. Actually.
There hasn't been one in a month, but last week they got into trouble, didn't they? NEFID got into trouble by the government giving out to them.
So
talking to the press.
I think it's more interesting than that, right?
Yeah.
So basically the day restrictions are announced last week, which is basically limits on hospitality, table sizes, half capacity.
None of those. Let's talk about that later, because a lot of them...
No. You see, these are the same thing, right? So that gets announced, and same day it gets announced that Neffet are effectively going to be muzzled because they'll no longer be able to do interviews without having advance clearance from the government press office, basically, right? The reason I'm saying those two are connected is because this time last year, after things had opened up and cases had started to take off, Houlihan tweeted that people shouldn't be going to restaurants because case numbers were too high. The Restaurant Federation went completely ballistic about that and demanded that he be gagged, and that was backed up by a number of politicians. And in effect, so the day they told hospitality they could only have 6 on the table is the same day that they also gave them what they wanted this time last year in relation to Neffet, which is to limit their ability to directly communicate with the public. So I don't think it's coincidental those two things happened on the same day. I think that was probably part of the backroom talks that were going on. Because from the hospitality point of view, and you see this on Twitter a lot, now I'm going to say, what I basically mean is the lobbying organisations. There's lots of restaurants and pubs aren't going along with this, but what's been pushed by the lobbying organisations is the idea that Neffet are scaring people out of going out. Right, so that what you're seeing is empty bars and restaurants. You're not getting as many people as you want, and their argument is that's because Neffet are scaring people. So people are too scared to go out, which is absolutely correct on one level, because most people at this stage of the pandemic are pretty smart and they go, 5,000 cases a day. I don't know. I don't really know if I really want to go out for that meal out and then spend the rest of the week wondering if I've got a cold or if it's COVID. A lot of my friends, I've made decisions to cancel stuff. Lots of people are doing that, and it's not because Neffet have scared us. It's because we can look at the data and go, "Yeah, Jesus, I think I'll wait till then case numbers are down a bit." Yes, that's
because lobbyists never really give intelligence to the people. They always think that they have to be sheeple.
Yeah,
but do you think that this is basically like, when they make the announcement and they also put a muzzle on Neffet, do you think that's like a package? That's a deal that they've done. They said, we have to do something, so they tell the lobbyists we're going to do this.
We're sweetening for you.
But also, we're sweetening the deal because we're going to tell Tony to shut up and he won't be able to do anything.
Yeah, I think that probably is what it is. And the thing is, it's also, there's been a whole load of media opinion pieces with, what's his name, Dan O'Brien possibly writing the worst of them. That, he wrote this one, which is fucking bizarre, but it's basically, he's gone, people in Ireland haven't suffered enough in recent decades, so they're too worried about people dying. My wife, who's Brazilian, they've had lots of people dying there. They think that's grand. And sure, other people have had huge wars and they've had lots of people dying, and they think they're not so worried about COVID as we are.
That's an opinion piece.
Yeah. And he's been on a couple of radio shows, and I think he was in the Indo with it, and he was tweeting it out. Or at least on Twitter, you get to intervene around it. But yeah, there is it's not just him. It's come up from a few different places. But yeah, there's this whole thing that it's terrible. We're too concerned about people dying, and that's stopping things going back to normal. And if we could just be like the UK and accept that there may be quite a lot of deaths, well, then we could all go to the pub. That's kind of the logic, and it's it's fascinating because
wow.
These are the people who say there's no such thing as society in Thatcher's famous words. So they're kind of like the problem they're facing now is there is such a thing as society, and actually in this society people are gone, I'd quite like a pint, but not at that sort of level of risk to others. That's not really what I'm about. So I'm probably just going to not bother for a while until it settles down.
Wow.
And they're frustrated because the places are open, but there's limited numbers of people going in, basically. So that's what.
But also, how we're less than a year away from what happened last Christmas.
Yeah.
And the only reason why we went into that with how many cases? I know,
400.
400, right?
No, there wasn't even. Sorry, it was 280, I think, or 260 when the day we opened
exactly.
up.
So now we're at a factor of 10. There's a multiple.
It's nearly 20. Nearly 20 times.
Yeah, nearly 20 times that, right? And we know that all the vaccination program is really working, but there's this new variant that inevitably is going to come in, and we're still not really doing anything. But the other, even just taking a step back, the organisation that the government set up, and the one that has consistently enjoyed more, I would say, respect from the public, is NPHET. And now the government is telling NPHET to shut up, even though we're going into an incredibly risky period with the new variant that we have no idea about what the R value is and a whole load of other things. So that's the situation at the moment. And we haven't heard from NPHET in what, a month?
There hasn't been a press conference. I mean, they had done media interviews. So
the government have told them to shut up. Press office. Everything goes through the press office.
So it's quite funny what's been happening the last couple of days, because obviously the government did that, and the initial tweets that were sent out had loads of support that to me felt was a little coordinated. Yeah. You know, I would not be surprised if political party members got an email saying, "Can you go online and say this is a great idea?" But after that, lots of people started to go, "What the fuck?"
Quite reasonably. Why would you silence? Why would you silence the public health experts? What's the public health experts? Is that what the committee's called?
Plus some journalists got quite annoyed. Gavin Riley, for instance, was meant to be having, I think, Nolan onto his Sunday afternoon show. Now, Leo had come out with something about NPHET modelling being inaccurate on Friday. It's also a good illustration of the problem here, right? So Gavin Riley had obviously contacted Nolan and said, "Do you want to come onto the show and explain how the models actually work?" Yeah. You'd imagine that would be a very useful public service.
Yeah.
And
especially since the Taoiseach is rubbishing publicly.
Yeah. And then the government press office said that no one was available. And he was like, "Well, I know he's available because he said he's available."
Yeah.
And today Micheál Martin was saying he's checked and nobody was stopped speaking over the weekend. And in doing so, illustrating very well why we can't trust them, because these guys just lie for a living. That's what they do. They basically, if they think, they don't even need to think they can get away with it. They just need to think that they'll convince enough of their own voters, or that people will have forgotten about it or whatever. I mean, they're completely ruthless. The last thing you want is trusting that crowd to be accurately relaying information to us about public health. Somebody was saying it's with the storm. It's like if instead of hearing from Met Éireann or whatever, we got it filtered through Dan O'Brien or something, or
whoever the minister for the environment is.
Oh well, not even that. I mean, to be the minister of housing, he keeps speaking and stuff because they can't send anybody else out. So it's completely farcical in terms of.
But this is going right back to like the Ministry for Information. I mean, this is Big Brother stuff. This is totally madness. And this is the same government that spent, wasn't there a specific fund in the preceding government with Fine Gael where there was 5 million allocated to spin doctors?
Yeah.
So that's the people who the government press office answer to.
And the funny thing is, so like all the people tweeting it, supporting this was saying, this was needed because communications were being inconsistent and everybody wasn't saying the same thing, and we need, for public health reasons, we need everybody to be saying the same thing.
Really
right?
dangerous.
But literally the next day after this happens and the government recommendations are out, you have Leo saying on the media that, maybe we'll be able to stop this quite early on. Maybe it's not as bad as it looks. I'd like to go, there's you gone way off message. Completely on your own
There's
bat.
the consistent,
There's the consistency.
We've just introduced new restrictions and you're going, sure, it won't be that bad.
Yeah. I mean, I apart from as a sop to the hospitality lobbying people, I think the other reason they've done it is because out of last Christmas disaster, in the aftermath, they tried to do this thing that nobody had told them and they hadn't been warned, and this was all unexpected, and they tried to blame Alpha at the time. And
just go back and listen to the shows. We can tell you
us ranting about it. If you go back to last November and you listen from there, I mean, we predict it happens, we say why it's happened, and then we talk about the way they're denying it. And it was just like, come on, lads. What?
Wasn't there a 76-page report as well that was given to them about not opening up hospitality?
The EY report as well. Yeah. Even the one they paid for didn't agree with. But anyway, if you limit the ability of your public health people to talk to the media, well, then there's fewer warnings that people then point to afterwards and say, "Oh no, look, he said this." Now, in fact, the other thing I think it's important to say is that on one level this isn't new, because one of the reasons we've heard so little from the actual frontline public health doctors, so the ones who are doing contact tracing and all that sort of stuff, is because they're not allowed to talk to the media directly. Everything has to go through the HSE press office. And the thing about stuff going through press offices is if they don't want a story covered, they'll just say, no, you can't do it.
Yeah.
You know? So if they decide a particular set of messaging, it might be that hospitality isn't safe, whatever else. This is getting made for reasons that are nothing to do with public health. We just won't hear about it. We won't even know the decision's being made. You know, because a couple of times it might be worthwhile journalists mentioning they refuse to give anybody to interview, but that becomes old news after a while. So anyway,
this is
that's where we
important
are.
because this is precisely why we do the show. So it's all up there. You can go back and you can listen to it, but like we're now like too early to tell how difficult this is going to be. Could get really messy, but we're already at the stage where the people who are going to tell them bad news and warn the public are now being silenced, and then they'll be able to say, well, we never heard from them, which is just
if we go back to the story I opened the show with, they'll pull the sort of bullshit that Fianna Fáil senator did, which is and in fact Leo's been doing this the last couple of days with the numbers in hospital. You'll get a period where for whatever reason cases are low, and then lots of them will be popping up going, look, cases are low, and they won't pop up the next day when they go back up again.
No, they disappear.
In fact, the thing is, because of the storm, right?
Yeah.
The storm today means that testing has been disrupted. There's lots of test centres not open. So that means Thursday, Friday, there's going to be lower cases.
Yeah.
And I will not be surprised if we get the Muppet Squad going, oh, look, it's down to 3,000 cases a day.
It's coming down. It's all over. We can just go back
to 7-day average is down.
We can have the best Christmas ever.
So, yeah, that's kind of...
right.
That's where we are with all that at the moment.
Oh, it just, it's so frustrating. Okay, so we're not expecting to hear from... So what are we... what...
We might get an Effort Prods conference tomorrow, because I think there's been such an outcry about it.
Right.
That they might...
They might have to be forced to shoved out there.
There's a bit of face saving going on. So, once the outcry started, they were saying, oh, no, we weren't saying you couldn't talk to the press. We just said you had to contact the press office so we could give you what the latest government briefing was, so you would know what it was. And
I think they'd never know what the government briefing was.
And somebody was saying you could just email everybody every morning with the latest.
It's not a... Yeah.
So that's obviously bullshit as well. But it could be that they because of the outcry, they'll go, well, maybe we'll let them do the press conference and we just won't let them do spontaneous interviews during the week or
we'll
whatever.
Try and control it that way.
Yeah.
And what about the HSE? Are the HSE still doing press conferences?
Yeah, they've still been doing them regularly. They're a different sort of press conference, though. Like, they're more kind of on
stats,
the immediate operational challenges they're facing at the moment, and what the situation is in Ireland in comparison with Europe. And to be honest, I think the HSE top management of those press conferences are much more like politicians in the way they operate, in that they're quite reluctant to have... Not quite to say to have bad news, but to admit shortcomings, right? So they've been trying to spin that testing isn't in crisis for the last couple of weeks, you know, and just say, oh, well, we're expanding capacity and whatever. And when you look at the figures, it's perfectly obvious that the limited access to testing at the moment means that we're probably 1,000, 1,500 cases lower each day than we would actually be, right? And it could be, in fact, one of the interesting things is, if you're looking at results at the moment, it looks like there's this gradual increase, right? Like that going up. It's even possible that what we're actually looking at is something that's more like this, that went up and is actually coming down a bit, but we've expanded testing a bit in the meantime. So we're seeing a little bit further up. So it might be with a bit of luck that actually the cases at the moment are coming down slightly, but because we've a better sight of them, what we're seeing is an upslope. So it's one of the many things about the testing program. I was hopeful about that 2 or 3 days ago, but positivity's gone up again the last couple of days, so I think that's less likely.
What is positivity now?
That positivity is the percentage of tests that are coming back
positive.
No, but what
is 16%. 16. All right, because it was down to 14.
It went down to 14. Yeah. So,
but also I think that's because the HSE are much more used to being controlled. I mean, there's a relationship there, because also the limited capacity in terms of testing is something that they should have planned for.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have got to a situation where we had... we never got below 3,000 cases. What was that, didn't we get, no, but I mean in the recent... When we came out of this, we started going steadily up to 2,000 cases, 2,500.
I'm not sure when we crossed the 3,000 line, but we've been over it a good while.
Yeah, a good while. So at what point did testing capacity get limited? Like, why did it get stepped down? Because I can't see any point.
Well, it wasn't
the
so
recent-
much that it was stepped down. It was that they'd essentially only planned a system that was capable of detecting maybe 3,000 positives a day, and then we ended up,
We
as I
ended up
said,
going
up
over that.
towards 5,000 at the
Yeah.
moment. So they therefore
Yeah.
expanded. Now, I mean, they were detecting 3,000 and 4,000, but I mean, they were only capable of detecting, say, that much without a larger and larger proportion of them being missed. So I think that's what's been happening
Right.
for the last while, is that proportion being missed has increased quite a bit.
But it should never have come as a surprise. Like,
No, I mean,
this
it
was going
Yeah.
that direction for a long
Once
time.
the decision was taken to reopen indoor hospitality, it was probable that was going to happen. That's certainly the point you should have started planning for it. And okay, it looked a bit optimistic in September that maybe that wasn't going to happen. So maybe that plan wouldn't have been needed. But certainly by the early October, you could go, oh, no, actually, this is definitely an increase here. We better
And here
get a
we
plan
are.
together.
Here we are in
December.
almost mid-December,
Yeah.
and we're talking about we're still building our capacity. Are we?
Yeah.
Tell me about the 6 measures. Not that I'm going to be going out anyway, but like I can go out to a restaurant with 6 different tables with 6 parties at it, a metre apart or something like that. So what are those?
Oh, no, the detail of it is they've chopped and changed things so much I don't know. It's basically, it's 6 to a table and you can't have multiple tables. So you can't do a Christmas party by having 5 tables of 6, for instance, right? There's no
Right.
mixing between tables. That's come back
Right.
as well. Everything has gone back to being table service, so no queuing at the bar for drinks, no dancing. So basically that's the nightclubs have gone with those ones. And then for big venues, like so gigs and pantomimes and things, it's half capacity.
Okay, but in none of this, right? Like, let's go back to the Norwegian thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ventilation is an issue.
Mm-hmm.
120 cases in a restaurant, right? We're now talking about 6 people at a restaurant, table service, doesn't matter. They're only a metre apart. I think the tables are only a metre apart. If you don't have a ventilation system and somebody goes in there with Omicron or whatever it's called, there's no possible reason why you won't get it anyway.
Yeah.
So like they're again totally meaningless in optics.
Well, they're not quite meaningless because the thing is, if you're half capacity, then that's only half as many people as can be infected.
Right.
So actually, they do. These measures do have an effect on slowing the rate of case growth, or maybe even leading to case reduction in the context where lots of people are vaccinated. So under Delta,
Yeah.
I'd have been more confident that they would have had an impact. The problem is, I think the evidence we're seeing is that once Omicron arrives, they'll slow its growth down, but it'll grow so fast that will make shag all difference. That's basically the problem we're facing.
Are we talking about restaurants being half capacity as well, or are we just talking about? Because I thought it was only
No, it's
venues
just
and
venues
gigs.
and things. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking mostly in terms of, but anyway,
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
That's good.
I
It's
think what
just
they were heading
not-
off with the restaurant thing is basically they were stopping people doing Christmas parties
Massive
by
parties,
by
like
booking multiple tables, and
Yeah.
that obviously is going to end up being more crowded, etc., etc. You know, it's kind of
yeah. Okay, so like that's kind of all my questions. I'm just like, I think we're at the stage where we're doing another wait and see, but it's inevitable that
yeah. I mean, I
the
think
supervillain's going to show up. And
yeah,
then
we're
it'll be
waiting for
another-
Omicron to take off. We still don't have really good data on severe outcomes. I mean, I think there's a problem in that some people are getting very hopeful that maybe it won't hospitalise as many people, but that's often based on not great understanding of the data.
Right.
Like for instance, if you're looking at data coming from South Africa, you're looking at a very young population, but you're also looking at a population that's probably already been infected, so probably has a certain level of immunity because they've been infected.
Probably more than once. as well,
You know,
yeah.
so you can't compare the hospitalisation rate with the hospitalisation rate of a naive population. And the bigger problem, I mean, so let's take that current hospitalisation rate we have of 1.5%, say, right? Which, as I said, that's almost half of what it has been previously, right? And let's say that actually it turns out that Omicron is milder and only hospitalises half that. So instead of 1.5, it's 0.75. I'm turning my maths here into something hard here. Let's make it a third, right?
Yeah.
So it hospitalises one person in 200, right? The problem is if, on the other hand, it also is incapable of infecting a lot of people very fast, and at 1 person in 200 becomes 2 million people infected, well then that's way more than we could deal with in hospital terms. That's basically the problem. So there's this misconception that a variant that is more transmissible but less lethal is somehow better than a variant that is more lethal but less transmissible. Right? Actually, I saw a good illustration of that, which is, which world would you sooner live in? The world where COVID exists or the world where Ebola exists? Right now, Ebola is going to kill 50 to 80% of the people it infects. COVID's less than 1%. Right?
Yeah.
But COVID transmits really easily. Was Ebola does, but only from people that are very obviously sick. So therefore, it doesn't spread so fast, right? I mean, we've had repeated Ebola outbreaks for years, but really, unless you're in the region, the village, the town they're in, they're not that important. They don't impact much of your life. If you are there, then you've a lockdown and all the rest in order to contain it, right? Whereas COVID, you know, the whole world gets messed up by it. So that's the other way of thinking by it. The transmissibility thing is really the problem, unless something is as harmless as the common cold, and that would seem like an overly optimistic take. We'll see. Ironically, so there is there are some people who've seized onto this though and go, well, if it's the common cold, it's great because it will just it will inoculate the whole population. You know, like it will go through us really fast.
Everyone's going to get it.
We'll all get immunity.
Everyone's going to get it.
And they tend to be the kind of anti-denialist, you know,
same people who haven't bothered getting the vaccine.
All those sort of people. So the entertaining thing about that, if that actually turned out to be true, then the most sensible thing you could do would be to have a really severe lockdown for 6 or 7 weeks, because what would actually happen would be Delta would be suppressed quite heavily in that lockdown, and Omicron wouldn't, and it would spread despite it. So therefore, that would get you inoculation sorted. I don't think the people advocating that have quite worked out that's the logic of their actual position. But,
because they never want the lockdown ever.
Ever. Well, hopefully we won't need to, but I think with Omicron it's looking we'll be lucky to get away with it. It will be to do with severe outcomes in a very highly vaccinated population. We still don't have a good idea about that. It's likely England will be giving us a good idea because they're doing nothing. They're saying go ahead with your Christmas parties, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's going to spread there very fast, and then 4 weeks after that, we'll have an idea of accurate hospitalisation figures. Public Health England are also very good at tracking data, so we'll have an answer there. But unfortunately, the process that gives us the answer there will also give us Omicron here.
Too late. It's too late.
We'll have a couple of weeks warning of what's coming, basically.
But given that anyway, and the circumstances in relation to, like, you wouldn't even discuss ICU beds because that's effectively at capacity.
Yes. I mean, there is.
So this is what I don't understand because. You can look at the trajectory and you can see a crash is coming.
Yeah,
we're on track for that.
Yeah,
and like we're thankful, obviously, that the vaccination is really helping. But if you're at capacity and you've got a new variant, and it's known to be more infectious or faster spreading or whatever it might be, whatever the scenario is, it's just bad news. And the 6 whatever little optics were about halving capacity or whatever else, right? That's just a small part in the small step in the right direction. But the rest of it is just, it seems like we're just waiting for the inevitable crash to happen. We're waiting for the next disaster.
It's basically, if anything that infects a lot of people, a lot of the population in a relatively short amount of time, and again, the problem with this is it's not even that it's spread out over a year, there's going to be a peak, and the peak will be very big. In order for it not to be a problem, then you need to have that percentage of people who will need ICU to be absolutely tiny.
Yeah.
As I said before, if it's 1 in 1,000, then for every 1 million people, that's 1,000 ICU beds. So Omicron infecting 4 million people in the space of 3 months is a complete disaster.
Yeah.
That's lots and lots of people dying who would not have died otherwise, basically. Even though it's only that 1 in 1,000, which is my estimate for the vaccinated population. So in order for that not to be a problem, what does it, 1 in 10,000 maybe? at that sort of rate, even that would be quite a big challenge over 3 months.
But
That's what you're talking about.
But how do you plan for that? How do you, like, if you do like the 6 restrictions that they've done, and they do the testing about people coming in or whatever, that's just gonna.
This is why I'm kind of pessimistic at this stage about a lockdown, because
yeah.
that's all you can do. And if it's the case that Omicron it's as transmissible as it appears,
yeah,
that would probably need to be quite a severe lockdown.
Yeah.
In order to work. Now, it could be, it could be that obviously South Africa could be that was very open at the time, no real restrictions in place. UK, obviously, there's no real restrictions in place whatsoever.
Yeah.
So it might be that actually the rate it transmits at here with the setup turns out to be lower. Maybe. We don't know. There might be, it might be more manageable. It could be that the boosters will take the edge off that hospitalisation thing, at least for a while. It's not like I don't think we are in an inevitable heading towards a lockdown in January situation, but we're really quite close to that happening. And basically, I think we need to be lucky, and the world needs to be lucky in some aspects of how this actually rolls out. But that is, you see,
that could be lucky, might be, maybe. I mean, there's a lot of risk associated with those words. There's not really any real, it's very hard to be assured, because it does feel like there's a pretty big gamble going on at the moment. That's what it feels like.
Yeah. Well, that's the case. That's why.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Let's come back next week, and maybe it'll get better. Maybe it will get worse.
By next week, I'd say we'll start to have some better data on hospitalizations in South Africa. It's still very preliminary, so it's kind of hard to know. And possibly transmission from English data will start to be quite solid. The numbers I'm throwing out here are kind of like early work that people are doing on available data. They're kind of sketchy. I mean, they're kind of useful to see.
Yeah.
And they are kind of coalescing around that sort of O equals 3 to 4 value, like that. The different ways you can try and work it out all seem to be throwing out similar numbers. But yeah, I mean, as we go on, data will become a bit more concrete, and hopefully it ends up that we keep it out of here long enough that the answer starts to become more definite. Because the thing is, as we've made 1,000 times before, acting early, even if you need to take severe action, even if you need to do a lockdown, you're better doing it early than doing it late, because if you do it late, it has to go on much longer to get things back under control again. And also, if you do it early, it might be that you don't have to do it at all. Maybe you just have to, tell restaurants and pubs that have to have capacity, and that will handle it, or whatever else. Once we've better idea, we'll have a better idea of where the limitations are.
Yeah. Just doesn't seem like it's our culture to act early, though, does it?
I wouldn't be planning any foreign holidays at the moment. That would be
no, unfortunately, that seems to be the way it works out.
That's the other aspect of things.
Okay, listen, it's good to know. Anyway, at least we get information from one place, and thankfully, the government press office cannot put a muzzle on you.
Oh no!
Which is great.
Just knocking on the door downstairs.
Somebody claiming to be the television license inspector, and suddenly get bungled into a van. All right.
Thanks,
Andrew.